Here are 14 practice problems on linear functions. As per usual, I'll link these questions and the answer key in the description, so if you want to work ahead, you can go ahead and do so. But if you need a little bit more help, I will be going through every single question. Or if you need further clarification, feel free to ask me. Anyways, let's get started with question number 1. An economist modeled the demand Q for a certain product as a linear function of the selling price P. The demand was 20,000 units when the selling price was $40 per unit, and the demand was 15,000 units when the selling price was $60 per unit. Based on the model, what is the demand in units when the selling price is $55 per unit? So here they tell us they modeled the demand Q as a linear function of the selling price P. So basically all this means is that the demand Q, this would be the Y value, and the selling price P would be the X value in a linear function. This means we can model the information they give us as points on a graph. So here they tell us that the demand was 20,000 units when the selling price was $40. We know the selling price is the X value, so that means that 40 would be our X value. Then we know that the demand is the Y value, so that means that 20,000 would be the Y value. Now let's do the same with the second piece of information. The demand is 15,000 when the selling price is $60. Selling price is the X value, so 60 is the X value, and the demand is the Y value, so 15,000 is the Y value. And now we have 2 points. Now we want to find the equation of this linear function, and to do that we can just use linear regression in desmos. So let's go ahead and put these points into desmos. First up, you want to click this plus sign in the top left corner to insert a table. Then you want to type in the points they give you. So we have 40 20,000 and 60 15,000. Now we need to type in the equation for linear regression, and that's y1 tilde mx1 plus b. And now we have our equation. We know that the slope of our line is going to be negative 250, and the y-intercept is going to be at 30,000. Now we can finally solve the problem. They ask us the demand, okay, not yellow. They ask us the demand, so they ask us the y value when the selling price, or the x value, is $55. So what we can do is just substitute 55 in for x in our equation. So y is equal to m, which is negative 250, times x, which is 55, plus b, which is 30,000, and we get that the y value, or the demand, would be 16,250, making our answer A. Question number 2. The cost of renting a backhoe for up to 10 days is $270 for the first day, and $135 for each additional day. Which of the following equations gives the cost y in dollars of renting the backhoe for x days where x is a positive integer and x is less than or equal to 10? So here we have a linear function, and I guess that's kinda obvious because that's what this whole video is about. But if you also look at the answer choices, you'll notice they're all in the form of y equals mx plus b. And that's the slope-intercept form of a line. Now let's start plugging in the information they give us. They tell us that it's $270 for the first day. That means it's only $270 once. That flat fee is going to be our B value. So we would do plus 270. Then they tell us it's $135 for each additional day. Since they say the word each, this is obviously going to be our slope. So we would do y is equal to 135x. However, there's going to be one small thing that you need to add. Now if we left it as just 135x, that would mean that for every single day, it's $135. However, that's not the case. The very first day, it's a different price. And then on the second, third, fourth, fifth, so on and so forth, then each of those days will be $135. Long story short, what I'm trying to say is you need to put a -1 right here, because this -1 will account for the first day that has a different price, which is $270. I don't know why I made that an underline and an arrow. Anyways, here's our equation, and now you just need to simplify this. So you would distribute the 135 to the x and the 1, and then 135 plus 270 is 135, so you get the equation 135x minus 135, which means our answer would be D. Now if you didn't want to simplify it by hand for whatever reason, you could just plug this equation into desmos, and then plug all your answer choices in until the graphs match. Question number 3. The function f gives the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit that corresponds to a temperature of x kelvins. If a temperature increased by 9.1 kelvins, by how much did that temperature increase in degrees Fahrenheit? So here in our equation, we know that this f of x part is going to equal the total degrees in Fahrenheit, and we know that this x part is going to equal the amount of kelvins. Before we do anything, let me put this equation in desmos. Okay, so I went ahead and typed the equation exactly as it is into desmos. So first, I'm going to choose a random starting temperature. Now, it doesn't matter what number you choose, it can be any number. So in this case, let me choose 67 Kelvin. That can be our starting temperature. Now, as for our second temperature, we know that the temperature increased by 9.1 kelvins. So our second temperature would be 67 Kelvin plus 9.1 Kelvin. And now we're trying to find out how much did the temperature increase from the first temperature to the second temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. So what I'm going to do now is actually just plug these numbers into our equation. So over here, I'm going to do f of 67, because that's our first temperature, and we get that this is the degrees Fahrenheit of 67 Kelvin. Then I'm going to do f of 67 plus 9.1. This is going to be our second temperature, or after the temperature increased by 9.1 Kelvin. And we get that the temperature of 67 plus 9.1 Kelvin would be negative 322 in degrees Fahrenheit. Now to find out how much the temperature increased, all we have to do is take the final number and subtract it from our starting number. And we get that the change in temperature in degrees Fahrenheit is 16.38 degrees, which means our answer is A. Now it doesn't matter what number you choose. If I chose a million, for example, okay, well that's 10,000, and then I did 10,000 plus 9.1, and then subtracted the difference, you would still get that the change in temperature is 16.38. Question number 4. The functions f and g are defined as that and that. If the function h is defined as that, what is the x-coordinate of the x-intercept of the graph of y equals h of x in the xy plane? So first, I'm going to type in our two functions f and g exactly as they're shown into desmos. Alright, so here's our two functions. Now as for our last function, they say the function h is h of x is equal to f of x plus g of x. Now we have three different lines on the graph, and this could be confusing and overwhelming. So if you just click on the colored circle to the left of the equation, you can just turn them off. Now they ask us for the x-coordinate of the x-intercept. So here's the x-intercept, and the x-coordinate is negative 12. So our answer is negative 12. Question number 5. According to data provided by the US Department of Energy, the average price per gallon of regular gasoline in the United States from September 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2014 is modeled by the function f defined below, where f of x is the average price per gallon x months after September 1st. The constant 2.74 in this function estimates which of the following? Let's quickly look at our answer choices. A. The average monthly decrease in the price per gallon. Well, we know it's not going to be the monthly decrease, because here 2.74 is just by itself. It's not being multiplied by x. So the actual monthly decrease would be 0.19. So we know it's not going to be A. B. The difference in average price per gallon from September 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2014. And if you look at C and D, it's going to be the average price per gallon on September 1st or December 1st. So based on what we know right now, we can't rule out any of those answer choices. Instead, let me quickly put this function into desmos. So I went ahead and plugged in our function. Now let's see if we can prove answer choice D, the average price per gallon on September 1st. Now we know that x is going to be the amount of months after September 1st. So we plugged in 0 for x, that would be 0 months after September 1st, or on September 1st. And we get that the average price per gallon on September 1st is 3.31. That's not 2.74, so we can get rid of C. Now let's look at D, the average price per gallon on December 1st. But December is going to be 3 months after September, so for x we would plug in 3. And we get that the average price per gallon on December would be 2.74. And this does match up, so that means that D would be our answer. Question number 6. For the linear function f, the table shows 3 values of x and their corresponding values of f of x. Function f is defined by f of x is equal to ax plus b, where a and b are constants. What is the value of a minus b? First up, let's plug this table into Desmos. What you want to do is click this plus sign in the top left corner and insert in a table. Now let's plug in our points, 1, -64, 2, 0, and 364. Now they tell us that function f is ax plus b, so we can just go ahead and rewrite that as a regression equation. And what we would do is type in y1 tilde mx1 plus b. So we basically just change the equal sign to a tilde, and then put a 1 in front of the x's and the y's. Well, I changed the f of x to a y, but you get the point. Now we get that the value of a, or m, would be 64, and the value of b would be -128. So let's just go ahead and do a minus b, 64 minus -128, and we get that the answer will be 192, which is D. Question number 7. Oil and gas production in a certain area dropped from 4 million barrels in 2000 to 1.9 million barrels in 2013. Assuming that the oil and gas production decreased at a constant rate, which of the following linear functions f best models the production in millions of barrels 2 years after the year 2000? So this question is very similar to question number 1, where they want us to write an equation in the form y equals mx plus b. Here we note that the production in millions of barrels will be our y value, and 2 years after the year 2000 will be the x value. So let's go ahead and rewrite the information they give us as points. First, they tell us that 4 million barrels were produced in 2000. So 4 million barrels will be our y value, and 2000 will be our x value. We know our x value is the amount of years after the year 2000. Well, 2000 is 0 years after 2000, so we would just put a 0 here. And then for the y value, we know it's the production in millions of barrels. So here we have 4 million barrels, so we would just need to put a 4. Then for our second point, 1.9 million barrels in 2013. We know that 1.9 million barrels will be our y value, and 2013 will be our x value. For our x value, the amount of years after 2000, 2013 is 13 years after 2000. And for the y value, the production in millions of barrels, there's 1.9 million barrels, so we would just put a 1.9. Now to write our equation, we can just put this in Desmos and use regression. So first, you would click this plus sign in the top left corner to insert a table, and then put in your points. And then to write the equation, you would type in the regression equation, y1 tilde mx1 plus b. And we get that the value of m is that decimal right there, and the value of b is +4. First up, we know that m is negative, so we can get rid of a and b, where m is positive. Now as to find out which fraction m is, I guess we can just put it in. So -21 over 130, that is the same. So that means that C would be our answer. Question number 8. 1 gallon of paint will cover 220 square feet of a surface. A room has a total wall area of W square feet. Which equation represents the total amount of paint, P, in gallons needed to paint the walls of the room twice? So here they tell us that 1 gallon of paint will cover 220 square feet of a surface. So 1 gallon is equal to 220 square feet, or we could also write it as a ratio, 1 gallon for every 220 square feet. They also tell us that this room has an area of W square feet, and they want to paint the walls of the room twice. So we're going to need to multiply this W square feet by 2. Then they want us to write an equation to represent the total amount of paint, P, in gallons needed. So to find the total amount of gallons of paint we need, we're going to multiply this 2 times W by our ratio, 1 gallon for every 220 square feet. Now what's going to happen is that these 2 feet, when you multiply them together, they'll cancel out, leaving you with your only unit as gallons. Alright, so let's go ahead and multiply this out. We would have 2W times 1 over 220. And then this would equal 2W over 220. And then that would simplify down to just W over 110. So P is equal to W over 110, which means our answer will be A. Question number 9. The function f gives the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit that corresponds to a temperature of x kelvins. If a temperature increased by 2.1 kelvins, but how much did the temperature increase in degrees Fahrenheit? So this is literally the exact same problem as something we just had, except instead of increasing by 9.1 kelvins, we're increasing by 2.1 kelvins. So first up, let's put this equation into desmos. Alright, so just like before, we need to choose a starting temperature. It doesn't matter what number you choose, I'm gonna just choose 23, for those who know. Alright, then for our second number, it's set that the temperature increased by 2.1 kelvins, so we would take our starting temperature of 23 kelvins and add 2.1 kelvins. Now to find what this converts to in degrees Fahrenheit, we can just plug it into desmos using our function. So we would do f of 23, this is our starting temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, and then we would do f of 23 plus 2.1, this would be our ending temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. And to find out how much the temperature increased, we would take our ending temperature and then subtract the starting temperature from it. And we get that the amount of degrees Fahrenheit it increased by is 3.78, which means our answer is A. Question number 10. The table above shows some values of x and their corresponding values f of x for the linear function f. What is the x-intercept of the graph of y equals f of x in the xy plane? First up, let's just go ahead and put these points into desmos. What you want to do is click this plus sign up here and then insert a table. Now the thing is, for linear regression, you only need to put in 2 points. So this time, instead of putting in all 4 points, I'm only going to put in the first 2 points, so negative 11, 21, and negative 10, 18. Now to get the equation of this function, we can use linear regression, which is y1 tilde mx1 plus b. And we get that the x-intercept would be at negative 4, 0, which means our answer is B. Question number 11. For groups of 25 or more people, a museum charges $21 for the first 25 people and $14 for each additional person. Which function f gives the total charge in dollars for a tour group with n people where n is greater than or equal to 25? So this question is going to be similar to the other word problem we had, where we want to write an equation in the form of y equals mx plus b. Now let's go ahead and start plugging in our information. We know that it's going to be $21 per person for the first 25 people. So we can represent that as 21 times 25. Now this value here has no variables, which means it's going to be our constant or our b value. So let's go ahead and write that plus 21 times 25. Then we know it's going to be $14 for each additional person. Now we see the word each, so this is obviously going to be our slope. We can represent that as 14 times n. Now just like before, we're going to need to subtract a number because here it's not going to include the first 25 people. It's only going to include the 26th, the 27th, and the 28th, so on and so forth. So we would need to put a minus 25. Now we can go ahead and just simplify this. 14 times n minus 350 plus 525, and then 525 minus 350 is 175. So we get that our answer would be A. Question number 12. For the function f, if f of 3 of x is equal to x minus 6 for all values of x, what is the value of f of 6? First up, we need to find the value of x, and what we can do is actually set these two equal to each other. 3x is equal to 6, and then we get that x is equal to 2. And now we can just plug in x. We get that f of 3 of x, which is just really f of 3 times 2, is equal to 2 minus 6. F of 3 times 2, that's just f of 6, is equal to 2 minus 6, which is negative 4. Oh my goodness, f of 6 is negative 4, how do we get there? Question number 13. An object hangs from a spring. The formula of that relates the length L in centimeters of the spring to the weight W in newtons of the object. Which of the following describes the meaning of 2 in this context? So let's go ahead and go through our answer choices. A. The length in centimeters of the spring with no weight attached. So here let's say that the weight was 0, we could go ahead and just cross this out, and we get that the length would end up being 30, not 2, so A won't be our answer. B. The weight in newtons of an object that will stretch the spring 30 centimeters. Well, we already know that when the weight is 0, the length would be 30, so the weight would definitely not be 2. C. the increase in the weight in newtons of the object for each 1 centimeter increase in the length of the spring. So let's go ahead and quickly rewrite this formula, but in terms of W. First, we would move the 30 to the other side by subtracting 30 from both sides. And then to get W by itself, we would divide the entire thing by 2. Then we would end up getting this equation. The weight is equal to the length divided by 2 minus 15. If we go ahead and ignore this minus 15 part, because we know that's just going to be the starting length, if the length of the spring increased by 1 centimeter, so let's say the length of the spring was 1, the weight would only increase by 1/2 of a newton, as you can see here, not 2. That means C won't be our answer either. Alright, we know D is obviously going to be our answer, but let's go ahead and read it just to check. The increase in the length in centimeters of the spring for each 1 newton increase in the weight of the object. First up, let's say that the weight of the object was 0 newtons, so we know that the length would end up being 30. Now, let's say that the weight of the object was 1 newton, so we would go ahead and plug in 1 for W. Now if we go ahead and solve this out, we'd get that the length would end up being 32. So yes, that checks out. When the weight of the object increases by 1 newton, so here it's 1 newton, and in this one, the weight would be 0 newtons, the length would increase by 2 centimeters, because here in the first one, the length is 30, and in the second one, the length is 32, so it increased by 2 centimeters. Question number 14. The table above, or really to the left, gives the typical amounts of energy per gram, expressed in both food calories and kilojoules, of the 3 macronutrients in food. If the 180 food calories in a granola bar come entirely from P grams of protein, F grams of fat, and C grams of carbohydrate, which of the following expresses F in terms of P and C? Alright, so if we look at our table, we know that in each gram of protein, there's 4 calories, so we can do 4 times P, plus each gram of fat, there's 9 calories, so 9 times F, plus each gram of carbohydrate, there's 4 calories, so 4 times C, and we know that all of these would equal 180 calories in total. Then they want us to express F in terms of P and C, which basically means just get F by itself. First, let's go ahead and move 4P and 4C to the other side by subtracting it from both sides of the equation. So we would get 9F is equal to 180 minus 4P minus 4C. Then we can divide the entire equation by 9 to get F by itself. So we would get F is equal to 180 divided by 9 minus 4P divided by 9 minus 4C divided by 9. We know that 180 divided by 9 is just 20. Now what we can do here with these two is that we can actually factor out a negative 4 over 9. And this would look like F is equal to 20, and then our factored out negative 4 over 9, and then in parentheses P plus C. So what happened is that we took this 4 over 9 here, and this 4 over 9 here, and we just moved it to the outside. And then we also took this negative sign, and this negative sign, and moved it to the outside. That's why there's no fractions in front of P or C, and then the minus sign changed into a plus sign. Anyways, that means our answer will be B. Alright, that was 14 practice problems on linear functions, and as you can see, these questions are really easy and also really similar to other things we've already covered. For example, this question here is just isolating variables. Then we also have linear word problems here. There are also a lot of linear regression problems, like this one. But when I went over all the skills that were going to be tested on the SAT, I realized that I haven't done one specifically on linear functions yet, so I thought that I might as well do it, even if it meant there was going to be some overlap in the types of questions covered. Anyways, if there's anything you should remember how to do regression in Desmos, inserting a table, and then typing your regression formula, y1 tilde mx1 plus b. When you get questions like these where they ask you what the number means, you should really just break down the equation and then go through every single answer choice. And then for some of these, you can just put it straight into Desmos and start plugging in some numbers. Alright, that's gonna be it. Good luck studying, and I'll see you.